In the summer of 2024, a routine traffic stop in Brookhaven spirals into a shocking fight for truth. Nia Caldwell, pregnant and fearless, faces a hidden network exploiting black mothers for profit. Each clue pulls her deeper into a conspiracy spanning hospitals, police, and politics. Want to see how it unfolds? Subscribe now, like, and share this video. The truth deserves to be seen. On a humid July afternoon in the summer of 2024, the asphalt along Brookhaven's Magnolia Avenue shimmered under the heat, like it was holding its breath. Nia Caldwell, 32 years old and in her 7th month of pregnancy, drove her silver sedan along that familiar stretch, the windows cracked to let in a soft hum of cicadas. She had just left a community legal aid meeting, her tote bag filled with case notes, flyers for a maternal health workshop, and a half-empty bottle of water. Nia wasn't just another driver that day. She was a seasoned civil rights investigator who had spent nearly a decade documenting abuses most people refused to believe still happened in Georgia. But in those moments, she wasn't wearing her badge or holding a camera. She was simply a woman heading home, her right hand resting protectively on her belly, her mind drifting to the soft rhythm of her unborn daughter's kicks. The flashing blue lights appeared behind her like a pulse, quick and sudden, cutting through the lazy stretch of the afternoon. Nia glanced in her rearview mirror, confusion flickering across her face. She hadn't been speeding. No broken taillight. No erratic turn. She pulled to the side, easing her car into the shade of an overgrown pecan tree. As the cruiser stopped behind her, gravel crunching under its tires, she could see the officer step out, tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with the kind of casual authority that suggested he believed the road belonged to him. His nameplate read, Mallory. "License and registration," Officer Trent Mallory said, his voice clipped, eyes scanning her interior before even meeting her gaze. His hand rested near his holstered weapon, not because there was any threat, but because it was a habit, or maybe a performance. "Sure, officer," Nia replied calmly, her voice even. She reached slowly into her purse for her wallet, the kind of deliberate movement she'd learned to make after years of teaching young people how to survive police encounters. She kept her tone light. "Is there a problem?" Mallory's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to her stomach, then to the legal folders on her passenger seat. "You match the description," he said flatly, though he didn't specify what description or for what crime. The words were a well-worn pretext, one that left no room for logic. Nia handed over her license and registration, her heart rate steady but alert. "I'm coming from a meeting at the community center. My ID is current. My car is registered in my name." Instead of returning to his cruiser to run her information, Mallory lingered, scanning the inside of her car like he was building a case out of shadows. His voice dropped, low enough to sound personal, but loud enough to be overheard by anyone watching. "Step out of the vehicle." She hesitated, not because she didn't know her rights, but because she knew too well what could happen when those rights were ignored. "Officer, I'm 7 months pregnant," she said, keeping her hands on the steering wheel. "If I've done something wrong, I'm happy to address it from here." Mallory's jaw flexed. "Out of the car, now." That single moment, her hesitation, his insistence, was enough to tip the scales. From the sidewalk across the street, a young woman named Tasha Reddick, out for a walk with her phone in hand, noticed the tension. She slowed her pace, lifting her phone just high enough to frame the scene in her camera. Nia opened the door slowly, stepping out with both hands visible. Wrapped around her like a heavy coat, the sun down on her back. Mallory stepped closer, closing the distance too quickly, falling over her. "Turn around," he ordered. "For what reason?" Nia asked, still calm but firm. The answer came in the form of force. Mallory grabbed her left arm, twisting it behind her back. The movement was fast, but not thoughtless. It was the kind of grip that conveyed dominance more than necessity. Nia winced, her free hand instinctively moving toward her stomach to shield her unborn child. That motion seemed to ignite him. He shoved her forward, pressing her against the hot metal of her car hood. From across the street, Tasha's camera caught it all. The sudden shove, Nia's head jerking back from the heat, her voice raising not in fear but in outrage. "I am not resisting," she said, each word clear enough to cut through the sound of passing traffic. "I am pregnant. You are hurting me." Mallory didn't stop. His hand pressed harder against her back as he barked something about non-compliance into his shoulder mic. Another code to our watch. Inside it, a man named Liam Harper gripped his steering wheel, torn between stepping in and staying out of it. He would remember that moment for months, the way her face tightened, the way his own pulse roared in his ears. When Mallory finally released her, it wasn't out of mercy. It was because another patrol unit had arrived, and the second officer, older and visibly uneasy, muttered something about letting her go. Mallory stepped back, breathing hard, muttering under his breath about these types. Nia straightened slowly, her skin burning from the heat of the hood, her arm aching where he'd gripped her. "Am I free to go?" she asked, still holding herself upright with the dignity of someone who refuses to give an inch, even when bent. Mallory didn't answer. He tossed her license onto the hood of her car and walked away. No citation, no charges, no explanation. Tasha's video ended as Nia climbed back into her car, her hands trembling for the first time since it began. By that night, the footage would make its way to social media, gaining traction in local activist circles. But the official police report, filed less than 2 hours later, would tell a different story. It claimed Nia was agitated and verbally combative, that she refused multiple lawful commands and was momentarily restrained for officer safety. The report made no mention of her pregnancy, no mention of the heat, no mention of the shove. The truth was there, burned into pixels on Tasha's phone. But the machinery of official narrative was already grinding into motion, smoothing over the edges, erasing the parts that mattered most. And in that erasure, something larger was waiting. A thread that, once pulled, would unravel a tapestry of secrets no one in Brookhaven was prepared to face. Malik Renner read the official police report 3 times in a row, each pass tightening the coil of disbelief in his chest. The report was short, barely 200 words, but each sentence carried the stale scent of fabrication. It was dated July 12, 2024, stamped by the Brookhaven Police Department's internal record system at 1847 hours. It claimed that his wife, Nia Caldwell, had been agitated during a routine stop, that she had refused multiple lawful commands and was momentarily restrained for officer safety. There was no mention of her pregnancy, no acknowledgement that she had been shoved against the hood of her own car in 95-degree heat. No reference to the civilian who had recorded the entire encounter from across the street. It was as if the most dangerous parts of reality had been scrubbed clean. Malik wasn't just any concerned husband. For 10 years, he had worked as an intelligence analyst for the Department of Justice, building cases from fragments, a stray number here, a name buried in a memo there, until the full pattern revealed itself. He'd stepped away from the DOJ 18 months earlier, burnt out from chasing leads that higher-ups had quietly told him to drop. But that training had never left him. He recognized the shape of a cover-up instantly. He closed the report on his laptop and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Nia was in the bedroom, stretched out on her side, her hand resting protectively over the swell of her belly. She'd told the story twice already, and each time she'd done it in the same calm, steady tone she used in depositions. But Malik had seen the faint bruise on her upper arm where Mallory's fingers had dug in. He had noticed the way she flinched when she reached for a glass of water, the muscle memory of restraint lingering. That night, long after Nia had drifted into a restless sleep, Malik opened his old DOJ laptop, the one he hadn't returned when he resigned, and tapped into public and semi-restricted law enforcement databases. His fingers moved with a quiet, methodical rhythm, pulling the roster for Brookhaven PD, then narrowing it to officers assigned to traffic enforcement. There were 34 names. He scanned the list until he found it. Officer Trent Mallory, badge number 4518, 9 years on the force. The first anomaly appeared in Mallory's arrest logs. Over the last 12 months, he had made 28 arrests of women between the ages of 18 and 35. 12 of them were marked as pregnant at the time of arrest, an unusually high proportion for any beat cop, let alone one whose jurisdiction didn't include maternity clinics or specialized patrols. Malik cross-checked the county's jail intake records. 8 of those women had been transferred to medical custody within 48 hours of arrest. The reason column was maddeningly vague. Health observation, high-risk monitoring, maternal care. None had any outstanding felony charges when they were taken into custody. He scribbled the numbers down in a notebook, the same kind of cheap spiral-bound pad he'd used at the DOJ. Each fact was a nail. He didn't know the shape of the coffin yet, but he could feel it forming. By dawn, Malik had gone further. He pulled similar data on 5 of Mallory's closest patrol partners. Together, they accounted for 43 arrests of pregnant black women in 2 years, a number wildly out of proportion with the demographics of Brookhaven, where the black population hovered around 35%, and birth rates were evenly distributed across racial groups. When Nia woke around 7:30, Malik was still at the kitchen table, his laptop casting a pale blue glow over his face. "You've been up all night," she said, leaning against the doorway. "I had to see," he replied, sliding the notebook toward her. "Mallory isn't just a bad cop with a short fuse. He's part of something patterned, targeted." Nia skimmed the numbers, her brow furrowing. "Pregnant women!" "Pregnant black women," Malik corrected. "Over and over again. And it's not just him. It's a cluster of them. Mallory's at the center." Her first instinct was disbelief, not because she thought Malik was wrong, but because the scope of it felt like fiction. "Why?" she asked softly. "That's the question," Malik said. "If I were still at the DOJ, I'd say it looks like a feeder system, a pipeline. These women get arrested for something minor, moved to medical custody almost immediately, and then they disappear from the public record. No charges pursued, no court dates. They just vanish." The word hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. Nia reached for her phone, scrolling to the number for Tasha Reddick, the young woman who had filmed her encounter with Mallory. "If this is true, it means what happened to me wasn't random," she said. "It means I was a target before I even pulled over." Malik's eyes darkened. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Over the next 48 hours, Malik worked like a man chasing a shadow through a maze. He tapped into his network of former DOJ colleagues, fishing for off-the-record intel. Most gave polite non-answers, but one, a data analyst named Rory Park, sent him a discreet message. "Check medical transfer logs for Eastridge County Hospital. Don't call me." Malik did. The logs confirmed another anomaly. Every woman transferred from the Brookhaven jail under maternal care was routed to Eastridge County Hospital's West Wing, a section of the facility that had been leased 3 years earlier to a private medical research group. The leaseholder's name was familiar: Eastridge Biotech. That name would mean nothing to most people, but Malik remembered it from an old DOJ case file about unethical clinical trials overseas. The case had gone nowhere. Too many sealed documents, too much political pressure. Now it was back, wearing a new mask. He printed the relevant pages, stacking them neatly beside his notebook. When Nia joined him in the living room that evening, he laid it all out. The arrest patterns, the transfers, the hospital lease, the corporate connection. "This is the first thread," Malik said quietly. "You pull it, and the whole thing unravels. But once we do, they'll know we're coming." Nia's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, the protective gesture now carrying a different weight. She had faced threats before in her work, but this was personal in a way nothing else had been. "Then we don't just pull it," she said, meeting his eyes. "We tear it out by the root." The determination in her voice was steady, but Malik could hear the undercurrent. The knowledge that this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. Not just hers, but the life growing inside her. That night, as rain began to tap against the windows, Malik drafted a secure data request to a trusted contact in the county court system. He marked it urgent and encrypted it twice. In another tab, he queued up the video Tasha had filmed. He let it play without sound, watching the moment Mallory shoved Nia against the hood. He paused it there, the frame frozen on the exact second her face turned toward the camera. In that still image, Malik saw not just his wife's pain, but a truth powerful enough to crack open whatever dark been festering behind Brookhaven's polished civic veneer. And for the first time since reading that falsified report, he felt the beginnings of not to the why of the conspiracy yet, but to the question of whether they could bring it into the light. Because now they had the first thread. And Malik Renner had never been the kind of man to stop pulling. It was the third morning after Malik had uncovered the arrest patterns, the kind of humid Georgia day where the air feels like it's pressing down on your shoulders. Nia sat in her car outside Eastridge County Hospital, the engine idling, her fingers tracing the rim of a travel mug she hadn't taken a sip from. She was there for what was supposed to be a routine prenatal checkup, but routine was a word she no longer trusted. Her OB, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Mariah Kent, had been with her since the first trimester. Mariah was not the kind of doctor who kept her head down. She had a reputation for speaking bluntly about the racial disparities in maternal health, even in rooms where it made people uncomfortable. That, in Nia's book, made her both trustworthy and dangerous. Dangerous to the wrong people. The appointment began in the usual way. Blood pressure, weight check, the soft whoosh of the Doppler as Mariah found the baby's heartbeat. But Nia noticed the doctor's hands moved faster than usual, her eyes flicking toward the closed exam room door between sentences. It wasn't until the nurse left that Mariah finally spoke, her voice lowered into a confidential register. "I saw your name on an internal list last week," she said. "It wasn't a medical list. It was flagged through intake at the West Wing." Nia felt her stomach tighten, and not from the baby. "What kind of list?" "Patients marked for extended observation under the Maternal High-Risk Monitoring Program," Mariah said, the words clipped, almost bitter. "But here's the thing. Half of those women never needed that level of care. And more than a few, they don't get discharged. Not through us, anyway." Nia sat up straighter on the exam table. "What happens to them?" Mariah's gaze dropped for a moment, as if she was weighing whether she should say it aloud. "They're transferred, not to other hospitals, to facilities contracted through Eastridge Biotech, private research labs. I've had patients disappear from my roster overnight. Their medical files get locked. If I ask, I'm told it's high-pay compliance, that I don't have clearance. But when you've been doing this as long as I have, you can tell when something's being buried." The words landed like cold water on hot stone. Sharp, hissing, impossible to ignore. Nia thought about the numbers Malik had shown her. The women arrested and moved within 48 hours. "Pregnant black women," she said. Mariah nodded once, firmly. "Always disproportionately. They'll cite higher rates of gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, whatever fits. But I've seen healthy women, no complications, taken in the middle of the night. Families told they were transferred for their safety. Those families never see them again." The air in the exam room felt heavier now. Nia could hear the muted sounds of the hospital beyond the door. A gurney wheel squeaking, someone paging a doctor. But inside, it was just the two of them, and the pulse of truth between them. "Why are you telling me this?" Nia asked. "Because you've already been targeted once," Mariah said, her tone plain. "I don't know how high up this goes, but I know what happens to women who make it onto that list. And I don't want to see your name disappear into some locked file. You need to be careful. You and your husband both." Nia leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" Mariah hesitated. "Some. Enough to make noise, not enough to take them down. But I can get more if I move quietly. There's a nurse in records who's seen what I've seen. We'll need time." Time. Nia almost laughed at the cruel weight of the word. "We don't have much of that," she said. Mariah gave a grim smile. "We never do." Before Nia left, Mariah scribbled something on the back of a prescription pad and slid it into her hand, a series of patient intake numbers and dates. "If anything happens to me," she said, "don't let this disappear. And for God's sake, don't store it anywhere obvious." The rest of the appointment passed in a blur. By the time Nia reached her car, she had folded the note twice and tucked it inside her phone case, close enough to feel through the plastic. 3 days later, Malik woke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was 7:02 in the morning. The name on the screen was Kayla Mendez, the reporter who'd started sniffing around after Tasha's video went public. "You know Dr. Mariah Kent?" Kayla's voice was tight, stripped of the casual rhythm she usually carried. "Yes," Malik said slowly. "Why?" "She was killed last night. Highway 85, just past exit 23. They're calling it a single-car accident." Malik sat up, swinging his legs to the side of the bed. "What happened?" "According to the preliminary report, she swerved to avoid debris and hit a guardrail. But here's the thing. A witness says she saw a dark SUV tailing her minutes before. That SUV didn't stop." By the time Nia sat at the kitchen table, her coffee untouched, the news was already circulating in local channels. "Beloved obstetrician dies in tragic accident." The anchor's voice was syrupy with sympathy, the kind reserved for respectable community figures. They showed a photo of Mariah smiling in her white coat, arms folded as if she'd simply been plucked out of a normal day and dropped into tragedy. No mention of the conversations she'd had. No mention of the list. Nia didn't cry. She felt the grief coil into something harder, sharper. Malik placed the folded prescription note on the table between them. "This is what she died for," he said. Nia picked it up, unfolding it carefully. Each number was a breadcrumb, a trail leading from the hospital's intake desk into the West Wing, and from there into the unknown. She thought of Mariah's steady hands on the Doppler, the way her voice had dropped when she'd said, "You need to be careful." "Then we follow it," Nia said. Malik's jaw tightened. "Following it means we're next." Her eyes didn't leave the paper. "Then we make it, so they can't touch us, without the world watching." That day, Malik reached out to Rory Park again, encrypting the intake numbers and sending them with a simple message. "Find the transfer logs for these patients." Meanwhile, Nia called Tasha, asking her to back up the video to multiple cloud drives, one of them overseas. "If anything happens to us," she told her, You release it all. No hesitation. By nightfall, rain had begun to fall over Brookhaven, washing the streets clean, but doing nothing to erase the bruise of Mariah's absence. In the glow of the kitchen light, Nia stared at the note again, the ink smudged slightly where Mariah's pen had pressed too hard. Each line was a life. A woman who had walked into a hospital or been driven there in custody, expecting care, and instead had vanished into the machinery Mariah had tried to warn her about. Nia thought about the timing. 3 days from warning to death. Too neat to be coincidence. It was the kind of swiftness that sent a message. We see you. We can reach you. But messages could be sent both ways, and Nia Caldwell had no intention of being silent. The next morning, she and Malik began mapping the numbers on a whiteboard in their living room. Names started to appear beside them as Rory fed back partial matches from public records. 6 women so far, ages ranging from 19 to 34. All black, all pregnant at the time of their last documented intake. Not a single discharge record among them. It was the beginning of a list, and lists, Nia knew, had a way of becoming indictments when the right people started looking. Somewhere out there, the people who had killed Mariah Kent believed they had severed a loose thread. They didn't realize they'd only made it tighter and more dangerous to pull. The first time Nia heard the name Sasha Linwood, it came through an encrypted email routed through 3 different servers. The subject line was just 3 words: "We need to talk." The body of the message was spare: a burner phone number, a time, and a single instruction: don't bring your car. It was set for 9 p.m. the following night at a 24-hour diner off Highway 17, a place known for its bottomless coffee and the kind of clientele that didn't ask questions. Nia showed Malik the email as soon as she got it. He didn't like it. Not the cloak and dagger feel of it. Not the fact that whoever this Sasha was knew how to reach Nia without leaving a digital fingerprint. But the timing was impossible to ignore. It had been 6 days since Dr. Mariah Kent's death, and they were still piecing together the trail of vanished patients. Whoever Sasha was, she'd chosen to step forward while the air around the investigation was still electric, still dangerous. At 8:45 that night, Nia and Malik left their phones in a Faraday pouch and took a rideshare 2 towns over before switching to a borrowed sedan. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly against the darkness, its red open casting a warped reflection on the rain-slick asphalt. Inside, the smell of fried eggs and burnt coffee clung to the air. Sasha Linwood was already in a corner booth, her back to the wall. She was in her early 40s, with pale brown skin and hair pulled into a severe bun, the kind of woman who looked like she could recite corporate policy in her sleep. But her eyes, sharp, restless, gave her away. She slid a manila envelope across the table before they even exchanged names. "I work in compliance at Eastridge Biotech," she said, her voice low but steady. "Or at least, I did until I started asking the wrong questions. That envelope has redacted versions of our internal audit reports from the past 3 years. The black boxes are for public consumption. The originals are a hell of a lot worse. Nia didn't touch the envelope yet. Why come to me?" "Because you're already on the list," Sasha said flatly. "And because Dr. Kent trusted you. She and I spoke once, about 18 months ago. She suspected what I already knew, that Eastridge has been conducting Phase 3 clinical trials on an experimental prenatal drug without patient consent. The subjects are almost exclusively incarcerated women. Specifically, women arrested under the Maternal High-Risk Monitoring Program." Malik leaned forward. "And local police feed those women into the program?" "Yes, they arrest them on minor charges, trespassing, disorderly conduct, unpaid fines. Once they're booked, medical staff flag them for observation if they're pregnant. The transfers go to Eastridge's West Wing, which we lease under a shell subsidiary called Pavilion Research. From there, they're administered the trial drug, Compound 86B. Officially, it's a treatment to reduce gestational complications. Unofficially, she paused, glancing around before continuing. It's a proprietary hormone cocktail designed to accelerate fetal development and collect data on long-term maternal tolerance. We've been tracking not just health outcomes, but behavioral changes. Nia felt her pulse spike. Behavioral changes? Sasha nodded grimly. Stress thresholds, emotional regulation, even maternal bonding. The drug's original funding came from a defense contract. The end game isn't healthier pregnancies. It's conditioning. The words sat between them like a live wire. Why pregnant black women? Malik asked, though he already suspected the answer. Sasha's mouth tightened. Because it's the demographic least likely to trigger federal oversight when outcomes go bad. High maternal mortality rates in black communities are already an accepted statistic. If a woman dies during the trial, it's written off as a complication. If the baby doesn't survive, it's another number in a grim national chart. No one looks twice. Nia forced herself to stay still, to keep her voice even. How many women? In the last 30 months? Sasha took a slow breath. 74, at least. It was the at least that made Nia's chest constrict. Malik finally reached for the envelope, flipping it open just enough to see pages of heavily redacted charts and tables. We're going to need the originals, he said. I know, Sasha replied. They're in a secure archive called The Ledge. It's air-gapped, no remote access. You'd need physical clearance to get in, and only 3 people have that. I'm one of them, but my badge access was downgraded last week. Someone knows I've been looking too closely. Nia's mind jumped back to Mariah. The night Dr. Kent died. Was she one of your sources? Sasha's gaze faltered for the first time. She'd been sending me patient names. I think she knew they were watching her. After the crash, I wiped my work email and started rooting through offshore servers. But that only buys me so much time. Once they decide you're a liability, they move fast. The server came by to refill their coffee cups, and they fell silent until she walked away. Outside, a semi rumbled past, its headlights cutting briefly through the blinds. What's your plan? Nia asked. Sasha let out a dry laugh. I don't have one. That's why I'm here. You have eyes on the ground, you have community support, and you've already drawn their attention. I can give you what I know, but getting the Ledge files, that's your battlefield now. Nia glanced at Malik. His expression was unreadable, but she knew him well enough to see the calculation behind his eyes. If we go for those files, he said slowly, we're going to need more than a whistleblower. We're going to need allies who can hold the line when the hammer comes down. You'll have them, Sasha said. Once this goes public, others will step forward. People are scared, but fear has a tipping point. I think we're close to it. Nia reached across the table, resting her hand briefly over Sasha's. If we're doing this, there's no halfway. Once it starts, they'll try to silence you. They've already tried, Sasha replied, a hint of steel in her voice. But they haven't succeeded yet. They left the diner separately, Malik circling the block twice before heading back toward Brookhaven. In the back seat, Nia flipped through the pages Sasha had given them. Even with the heavy redactions, the patterns were unmistakable. Clusters of intake dates matching arrest records Malik had already flagged, each followed by a transfer to MHRMP West and a notation for Compound 86B administration. In the margins, Sasha had written patient initials and, in some cases, question marks. Missing names. At home, they laid the pages out on the dining table, filling the gaps with information from Mariah's note. When the two sets overlapped, the picture sharpened. The same women, the same dates, funneled through the same invisible channel. "This is the pipeline," Malik said quietly. "From street arrest to medical custody to trial subject, all under the radar." "And all under Eastridge's control," Nia added. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. That 74 was just the number they could prove. The real figure could be double that. Triple. Later that night, Malik received a text from an unknown number. It was just a street address in the industrial district, followed by the words, "When you're ready to see the ledge." No name, no signature. Nia stared at the screen over his shoulder. "Think it's Sasha? Or someone watching her," Malik said. They both knew they'd have to decide soon. The deeper they went, the smaller the circle of trust became. And somewhere inside that shrinking circle, the ledge waited, holding the proof that could either bring the whole machine down or bury them with it. It began with a single name on Sasha Linwood's redacted chart: E. Maddox. Nia didn't recognize it at first, but Malik remembered seeing it in a county incident log from 18 months ago. Erica Maddox, 26, arrested for disturbing the peace outside a laundromat. 8 weeks pregnant at the time. The official record claimed she'd been released the same night, but according to the hospital's West Wing intake files Sasha had smuggled out, Erica had been admitted for high-risk observation 2 days later. No discharge date, no follow-up, just a void. That void became their starting point. Malik dug into public death records, cross-referencing every name from Sasha's partial list. Most came up blank, but 3 had matching death certificates. The problem was, all 3 certificates looked wrong. The formatting was off, the digital stamps misaligned. One listed natural causes for a 22-year-old with no known medical history. Another was signed by a coroner who had retired 4 years earlier. Malik printed them out and laid them side by side on the table. "They're forged," he said flatly. "Badly, too. Whoever did this wasn't expecting anyone to look." Nia stared at the names, each one a life smoothed over into administrative nothingness. If they're forging death certificates, it means at least some of these women never made it out alive. They needed more than paper trails. They needed something indisputable. That's when Malik reached out to Jonas Avery, a tech activist he'd crossed paths with years earlier during a DOJ investigation into government surveillance overreach. Jonas was the kind of person who lived in the spaces between firewalls, a man who could slip into a secure database like water through a crack. He operated out of a converted warehouse in East Atlanta, his workspace cluttered with servers, monitors, and half-assembled drones. When Nia and Malik arrived, Jonas was soldering something that looked like a hybrid between a router and a car battery. He didn't look up. "You know it's bad when you call me," he said. "It's worse than bad," Malik replied, handing over a flash drive. "We think Eastridge Biotech is running unauthorized clinical trials on pregnant women. We have partial records, but the originals are locked in an offline archive they call the Ledge." Jonas plugged the drive into an isolated terminal, scanning the files in silence. When he finally looked up, his face was tight. "You're not wrong. These aren't just redactions. They've been through multiple scrub cycles. Someone's been actively erasing digital footprints." Nia leaned forward. "Can you get into the Ledge?" Jonas smirked. "I can get into a lot of places. But an air-gapped system? That's trickier. You can't just hack it remotely. You have to be in the room, plugged into their network." Malik exchanged a glance with Nia. "We have a contact with partial access," he said, meaning Sasha without saying her name. "Good," Jonas replied, "because the stuff you've got here? This is the tip of the iceberg. If the Ledge has raw trial data, it'll have dates, dosages, side effects, mortality stats, things they can't spin away once it's public." For the next week, they worked in shifts, Jonas teaching Malik how to navigate the hospital's buried archives, while Nia chased down family members of women on the list. It was grueling work. Some families hung up the moment they heard her voice, too worn down by grief or fear to talk. Others spoke in whispers, afraid that even discussing their daughters or sisters could bring trouble to their doorstep. One conversation stuck with Nia. A grandmother named Lillian Porter, who'd been raising her 2-year-old grandson since her daughter died suddenly after being taken into medical custody. "They said it was eclampsia," Lillian told her. "But I saw her 3 days before and she was fine. She was laughing. She was still herself." Meanwhile, Jonas hit his first breakthrough in the hospital's security archives. Using a string of old admin credentials Malik had recovered from a leaked HR file, Jonas accessed a hidden directory labeled Archive Serve. Inside were time-stamped video logs from the West Wing's security cameras, but half of them were corrupted or missing. "This is deliberate," Jonas said, tapping the screen. "They're not just deleting footage, they're overwriting it with dummy files. But they missed one." The surviving clip was 23 seconds long, dated March 14, 2024. It showed a pregnant woman in an orange jumpsuit being wheeled down a hallway by 2 orderlies. At the end of the hall, a man in a white lab coat scanned a badge, and the doors to a restricted wing slid open. The woman's face was pale but alert. As the gurney rolled through, the man glanced up at the camera. It was Trent Mallory. The footage was grainy, but the jawline, the set of the shoulders— there was no mistaking the officer who had shoved Nia against her car. Nia felt a cold fury settle into her bones. "That's our link," she said. "From arrest to hospital transfer." Jonas backed the clip up to 3 different encrypted servers, one of them overseas. "If the ledge has more of these, we can map the whole operation. But we'll need physical access to copy them, and we can't go in blind." Malik pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. The industrial district address they'd received via anonymous text. "This is where they want us to go," he said. Jonas raised an eyebrow. "They? Or she?" "That's the problem," Nia said. "We don't know. They decided to treat it like a hostile site. No phones, no traceable electronics, backup waiting 3 blocks away." Jonas outfitted them with a portable cloning device no larger than a paperback, capable of downloading terabytes in under 4 minutes. But before they could even plan the entry, Jonas dug deeper into the hospital's data architecture and found something stranger. A hidden index file, buried under layers of benign-looking code. The index contained a list of every record stored in the ledge. The titles alone were chilling. Subject Cohort A. Maternal Termination Events. Compound 86B Behavioral Response Logs. Neonatal Vital Decline Metrics. There were 74 subject IDs in total. "They've kept every bite," Jonas said. "Every bad outcome, every death. They're not erasing it from their system. They're just erasing it from the outside world. The ledge is their insurance policy. If they ever get investigated, they can control the narrative by deciding who sees what." Nia stared at the list, her fists clenched. "Then we take all of it, every last file. We don't give them the chance to spin it." For the first time in weeks, Malik felt the momentum shift. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were moving toward something, toward a breach that could rip the operation into the open. But with that shift came risk. Every move they made now would be against people who knew they were coming. That night, as rain streaked the warehouse windows, Jonas slid the portable drive across the table. "Once you're in, you'll have 3 minutes, maybe 4 before their system triggers an alert. After that, the doors will lock, and you'll have company you don't want." Nia picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her palm. It wasn't heavy, but it carried the kind of gravity that could topple careers, companies, maybe even political offices. 3 minutes is all we'll need, she said. They all knew it was a lie. Not about the time, but about what those minutes would cost. It started with the phone calls. At first, Malik thought they were just his old contacts checking in. The kind of polite, coded conversations federal people have when they're trying to feel you out without tipping their hand. But the second one, from a former DOJ supervisor named Eric Hanley, made his stomach tighten. "Malik, I'm telling you this as a friend," Hanley said, his voice low, the hum of an office ventilation system in the background. "Whatever you're poking at in Brookhaven, leave it alone. You're in a game you can't win." "I've been in games like this before," Malik replied. Hanley didn't laugh. "Not like this. There's money in it. Contracts, the kind that stretch across agencies and disappear into black budgets. People above my pay grade are invested in making sure it stays quiet." He hesitated, then added, "You've got a wife and a baby on the way. Think about what's worth protecting." It wasn't a threat in tone, but Malik had spent enough time in federal rooms to know when one was being delivered. 2 days later, the harassment began in earnest. It started small. Nia's email flooded with spam, her phone freezing mid-call, her banking app refusing to load. Then came the clerical errors at the mortgage office, the sudden anonymous complaints to the state licensing board where she worked as a civil rights investigator. Within a week, the real hit landed. A series of grainy, selectively edited clips began circulating online. In one, Nia appeared to be screaming at an officer during a protest, though the original footage, which she knew intimately, had her calmly reciting a statute on unlawful detainment. Another showed her shoving a clipboard into someone's chest, cropped just enough to hide that she was blocking them from snatching confidential documents. The captions were brutal, unstable, aggressive, dangerous to the public. By the third day, a local talk radio host was calling her the most volatile woman in Brookhaven. Malik had seen smear campaigns before, but never this personal, never this calculated to isolate its target. "They're softening the ground," he told her over cold coffee at the kitchen table. "So when the real story hits, people will already have their doubts about you." Nia didn't look up from the article she was reading. "Then we'll make sure they see everything." That everything began to take shape when Kayla Mendez, the freelance reporter who'd first called them about Dr. Mariah Kent's crash, showed up at their door. It was just after 9 p.m., the summer heat finally breaking outside, her hair damp from a quick rinse. She carried a recorder in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. "I've been chasing this for months," Kayla said, once they'd settled into the living room. "But I could never connect the police arrests to the hospital transfers. Now, with Sasha's files and that security footage you got from Jonas, we can run it." Malik eyed the recorder. "Running it will make you a target, too." Kayla gave a half-smile. "I've already had my brakes cut once this year. The difference is, I don't have a baby to protect." They talked for hours, Kayla outlining her plan for a serialized exposé. She wanted to drop it in 3 waves. First, a deep dive into the arrest patterns, complete with family interviews. Second, the medical custody transfers, using Mariah Kent's notes and Sasha's partial files. Third, the kill shot, the raw trial data from the ledge, assuming they could get it. "It has to be serialized," she explained, "because they'll try to kill it after the first piece. This way, every time they attack, it drives more attention to the next part. People will be watching to see what happens next." The first article hit on a Wednesday morning. Kayla's byline sat under a headline that was impossible to ignore. "Pregnant, Black, and Arrested. The Hidden Pipeline in Brookhaven." It was meticulous. Dates, badge numbers, arrest charges so petty they looked absurd in print. She included a side-by-side graphic comparing the arrest rates of pregnant Black women to every other demographic. The disparity so stark, it was almost unbelievable. By noon, the article had been shared over 20,000 times. By evening, Nia's phone was buzzing with messages from strangers thanking her for speaking out, mixed with the predictable flood of vitriol from trolls and bot accounts. The backlash was immediate. A county police spokesperson called the piece "dangerous misinformation." A thinly veiled editorial in the Brookhaven Gazette accused certain activists of manufacturing statistics to advance divisive racial narratives. And then, in the middle of the night, Malik's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, or the next headline is yours." He didn't tell Nia until the next morning. She listened, then quietly poured herself another cup of coffee. "They're already writing that headline," she said. "The only difference is whether it says we fought back or not." The second article dropped 5 days later. This one centered on medical custody, a phrase Kayla made sure to put in quotes throughout. She walked readers through the process: the arrest, the rapid transfer, the sealed medical files. She quoted anonymous hospital staff who'd seen women taken to the West Wing and never return. By this point, national outlets had started sniffing around. A producer from a major cable network called Malik, offering an on-air interview. He declined. Too soon. They needed the ledge before going wide. But the pressure was building. Malik's old colleagues began reaching out again, not as friends this time, but as functionaries. One was blunt: "If you keep going, you'll lose more than your career." Another dangled a job offer in another state, with relocation assistance for the sake of your family. Meanwhile, the smear machine went into overdrive. A fake police report surfaced online, alleging Nia had once assaulted a neighbor during a domestic dispute. Malik traced it back to a server registered in Delaware under a law firm that had represented Eastridge Biotech in unrelated cases. Through it all, Nia stayed focused. "If they're hitting us this hard," she told Malik one night as they cross-checked Sasha's intake numbers against Jonas's archive list, "it's because we're close. They wouldn't waste the energy if we weren't." The third article was scheduled for 2 weeks out. That meant they had 14 days to get into the ledge, download everything, and get it to Kayla. 14 days to outpace a system that had already erased 74 women without consequence. Every night, Nia found herself thinking of Mariah Kent's words in that exam room. "You need to be careful. You and your husband both." She wondered if Mariah had known how short her own timeline was when she said it. One evening, after a long day of planning with Jonas, Malik stepped outside to take a call from one of his most trusted former sources, a mid-level DOJ investigator he hadn't spoken to in over a year. "They're moving assets," the voice said without preamble. "Physical evidence, digital backups. They're prepping for a shutdown in case someone gets close." "How close?" Malik asked. "Close enough that they've started using your names in briefings." When Malik came back inside, Nia was pinning a map of the industrial district to the wall, marking possible entry points to the facility at the address they'd been sent. "They know we're coming," Malik said. Nia looked up, her eyes clear. "Good. Let them prepare. We'll still get it." It was one thing to steal into the shadows for evidence. It was another to walk through the front door with the law at your back. For weeks, Malik and Nia had been balancing on the edge between those two worlds, playing cat and mouse with people who could erase them without leaving a bruise for anyone to find. But on a damp Thursday morning, the line finally snapped in their favor. Sasha had done more than pass along floor plans and access protocols for the ledge. She'd slipped them the one thing that could turn a desperate break-in into a sanctioned operation: an unredacted personnel memo linking the ledge to both public and private funding streams. One of those streams flowed directly into a federal grant program with oversight from the Department of Justice. That was the lever. Malik called in the only man he trusted enough to pull it: Assistant U.S. Attorney Reuben Tate. Tate was the kind of prosecutor who could look at a wall of political pressure and walk straight through it. The kind of man whose enemies were so high up the ladder, they forgot he had friends on the ground. He'd worked with Malik during a racketeering case years earlier, and while they hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, Tate didn't hesitate. "This isn't a sting," Tate said when they met in a quiet DOJ conference room, the blinds drawn tight. "It's a seizure. We go in under warrant, sealed until the last second, so they don't have time to wipe the servers. You'll both be on the ground as subject matter witnesses, but once we're in, the chain of custody is mine. That means no hero moves, no improvising. You find it, you hand it over." Nia's jaw tightened. "We hand it over if it's whole. If you think you can disappear pieces..." Tate's eyes were sharp. "You called me because I don't disappear pieces. Don't forget that." The night before the raid, they staged in a warehouse 10 miles from Eastridge's West Wing facility. It looked like any other industrial loading area, the kind of place you'd drive past without noticing. Inside, tactical boxes lined the walls, DOJ agents checking weapons and body cams. Sasha was there, pale and sleepless, running Malik through the door codes again. Once you're inside the ledge room, it's climate-controlled. Far wall, second row. That's where the trial data servers are. The backups will be labeled MHRMP, Cohort A through C. Get them all. At 6:42 a.m., they rolled out in 3 unmarked vans. Rain streaked the windows, the wipers a steady metronome against the low growl of engines. Nia sat in the middle row, her eyes fixed on the building coming into view. White concrete, no signage, the kind of bland architecture designed to vanish into a business park. By the time the first van braked at the main entrance, Tate was already out, his badge in one hand, the sealed warrant in the other. "Federal warrant. Step aside." His voice cracked against the glass doors, and for a split second, the receptionist froze before fumbling for the phone. DOJ agents swept past her, securing the lobby, the stairwells, the elevator bays. Malik and Nia moved in with the second wave, trailing a pair of agents to the restricted corridor Sasha had marked on the map. An access panel blinked red, until Sasha, pale but steady, keyed in the override code she'd memorized. The door slid open, revealing a narrow hall ending in a reinforced steel door. The ledge. Inside, the air was cold enough to sting the lungs. Rows of black server towers stood in perfect lines, green lights blinking in slow, even rhythm. Malik moved fast, his gloved hands fitting the portable cloning device Jonas had given them into the first server port. Data began streaming instantly, file names scrolling like confessions, maternal termination log 2023 Q4, compound 86B adverse reactions, subject cohort, a mortality timeline. Tate entered a minute later, 2 agents at his back. He scanned the screens, his jaw tightening. "You weren't exaggerating," he said. "Wait until you see who signed off on the protocols," Malik replied. They found it in the administrative folders, PDF scans of correspondence, each stamped with internal routing codes. And there, as clean as a signature on a bill of sale, were the names. Darrell Boone, Chief of Brookhaven Police, personally authorizing the arrest-to-custody pipeline under Community Safety Initiatives. Santetonmater, Senator Lionel Cray, Georgia's senior state senator, approving federal grant disbursements to Eastridge Biotech for maternal health research. Claudette Hensley, CEO of Eastridge, outlining the profitability of Phase 3 results for future pharmaceutical partnerships. Nia stared at the screen, her fists clenched so tight she could feel her nails through the gloves. "They wrote it all down," she said. "They always do," Tate replied. "Ego loves a paper trail." By 8:08 a.m., they had cloned every drive in the ledge, boxed physical backups, and photographed every paper file in the locked cabinets. Outside, the facility parking lot was a knot of flashing lights. Marked units from the DOJ's regional office, local media starting to swarm the perimeter as the news leaked. Chief Boone was arrested on site, his expression caught between disbelief and outrage as agents led him past the cameras. Claudette Hensley was not in the building. She'd been detained at her Buckhead penthouse less than 20 minutes earlier. And Senator Cray? By the time the warrant hit his office, he was already on a flight to D.C., where Tate promised an arrest warrant would be waiting. As they loaded the evidence into secured vans, Nia stood at the edge of the lot, the cold drizzle soaking through her hair. She thought about the 74 women whose names had become lines in a database, the families who'd been given lies instead of answers. This was for them. Malik came up beside her, his coat collar turned up against the rain. "It's not over," he said. "It's the first time it feels like it's starting," she replied. Back at the DOJ office, Tate ordered the evidence locked in a restricted evidence vault. "Chain of custody starts here," he told Nia and Malik. "Every bite of this gets mirrored to federal servers in 2 locations. No more shadows." By midday, Kayla Mendez had the story. She ran the first headline at 2:30 p.m. Federal raid uncovers illegal drug trials on pregnant women. High-ranking officials implicated. The names of Boone, Cray, and Hensley were there in bold, the photographs from their arrests already making the rounds. Phones lit up across Brookhaven, some with shock, some with rage, and some, Nia knew, with panic from those still in the wind. That night, as she sat at the kitchen table scrolling through the coverage, Malik set down 2 mugs of tea. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of it. Clean, sharp, alive. "You realize," he said quietly, "this puts targets on our backs bigger than ever." Nia nodded. "Then we make sure everyone's watching." The indictments dropped on a gray Monday morning, the kind of day when the air hung heavy and the clouds seemed to press low over the city. But the mood inside the packed federal courthouse was anything but muted. Every hallway hummed with reporters clutching notepads, camera crews jockeying for position, and onlookers craning their necks just to catch a glimpse of the accused. The first to appear was Officer Trent Mallory. He walked in wearing a charcoal suit instead of his uniform, but the rigid, squared-off gait was the same one Nia remembered from the day he shoved her against her own car. His face was stone, his eyes fixed on some invisible point ahead. The indictment against him was a clean, surgical cut. Deprivation of rights under color of law, excessive force, and participation in a conspiracy to funnel detainees into unlawful medical custody. Behind him came Chief Darrell Boone, his once impeccable uniform replaced by an ill-fitting civilian jacket. The man who'd built his public image as a pillar of community trust now stood accused of running an arrest pipeline that disproportionately targeted pregnant black women. 74 confirmed cases, though prosecutors warned the true number was likely higher. Boone's charges included civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and perjury. Then came the bigger political shockwave. Senator Lionel Cray. He didn't enter quietly. Cray had always been a man of theater, and even in disgrace, he played to the cameras, offering tight-lipped smiles and adjusting his tie as if he were walking into a fundraising dinner instead of an arraignment. The indictment laid him bare: campaign donations in exchange for political cover, direct approval of federal grant allocations to Eastridge Biotech despite evidence of abuse, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. And then, finally, Claudette Hensley. The CEO of Eastridge Biotech arrived flanked by attorneys, her blonde hair immaculately styled, her expression one of cold indignation. Her charges cut the deepest: human experimentation without consent, negligent homicide in connection with multiple maternal deaths, falsification of medical records, and conspiracy to obstruct federal oversight. The prosecution's statement was blunt. Ms. Hensley's actions demonstrate a corporate culture that placed profit over life, research data over human dignity. Nia sat in the gallery beside Malik, her fingers curled tightly around a pen she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. It wasn't triumph she felt. Not yet. What she felt was the pressure of the room, the weight of knowing that each person walking through those doors had operated for years in full view of the system, shielded by titles and influence. Kayla Mendez was there too, her notebook already half filled before the first hearing even began. She'd secured a press badge and a front-row seat, her eyes darting between the defense tables and the row of federal prosecutors led by AUSA Reuben Tate. When Tate stood to read the formal charges aloud, his voice carried through the chamber with a steady cadence that brooked no interruption. "These proceedings are not merely about the crimes of individuals," he said, "but about the deliberate exploitation of systemic blind spots to target the most vulnerable members of our community. The evidence we will present comes directly from the ledge, the defendant's own records, and it will show a coordinated effort to violate constitutional rights for financial and political gain." The statement sent a murmur through the gallery. Outside, the courthouse steps had turned into a stage. Activists held signs with the names of the women taken into medical custody, while counter-protesters waved placards decrying the indictments as political witch hunts. National media vans lined the block, satellite dishes angled toward the cloudy sky. By noon, every major news outlet was running live coverage. Clips from Kayla's serialized exposé were replayed alongside footage from the federal raid. The image of Boone in handcuffs splashed across the lower thirds. But the reckoning was not just playing out in court or on television. It was happening in living rooms, in break rooms, in whispered conversations at grocery stores. People who'd once defended the police department or brushed off rumors about Eastridge were now confronted with signed memos, timestamps, and video evidence that could not be explained away. The charges against Hensley drew particular public outrage. The prosecution revealed that internal Eastridge communications referred to test subjects not by name, but by alphanumeric codes, and that mortality reports had been marked acceptable attrition in quarterly summaries. For many watching, it was the first time the abstract notion of human experimentation was made horrifyingly concrete. Still, the pushback came fast. Boone's supporters claimed the arrests were part of a legitimate community safety initiative. Cray's allies in the state legislature floated theories about weaponized prosecutions, timed to damage his political career. Hensley's legal team leaned hard on the language of experimental medicine and medical risk, painting her as a misunderstood innovator. Malik knew this phase well. "The first thing they'll try to do is shrink the frame," he told Nia over dinner that night. "Make it about politics, not about people. If they can turn it into a partisan fight, they'll make the facts seem negotiable." Nia wasn't having it. "Then we don't let them shrink it. We make it bigger. Every woman's story, every record from the ledge. We drown them in truth until they can't spin fast enough." Kayla seemed to agree. The morning after the indictments, she published a piece that landed like a hammer: "The Women Behind the Numbers." It profiled 6 of the 74 confirmed victims, telling their stories in full: where they'd lived, who they'd loved, what dreams they'd carried before being pulled into the system. The photos, provided by families, were devastating in their ordinariness. A young mother holding a newborn on a porch swing, a smiling teenager in a graduation cap, a woman laughing with her hand on her pregnant belly. The article went viral within hours. Hashtags bearing the women's names began trending. Donations poured into legal aid funds for the victims' families. Meanwhile, Tate's office moved with calculated speed. Mallory and several other officers were formally suspended from the Brookhaven Police Department pending trial. Federal marshals secured the East Ridge West Wing facility, and forensic teams combed through every file room and server for anything that might have been missed in the initial raid. By the end of the week, an internal DOJ memo, leaked, possibly intentionally, confirmed that additional arrests were likely. That alone sent ripples through political circles in Atlanta and D.C., where whispers of the Brookhaven case were now spoken with a mix of fear and fascination. And yet, for all the visible progress, Nia could feel the undercurrent, the quiet movements of those still trying to contain the damage. She'd learned long ago that public reckoning was never the end. It was only the opening move in a longer, more dangerous game. That night, standing on their porch as rain slicked the street in silver, Malik joined her. "You know they're not going to stop," he said. "I know," Nia replied. She looked out at the wet pavement, the reflection of the streetlight fractured by ripples. "But neither are we." The trials stretched on for nearly a year, a relentless procession of testimony, evidence, cross-examinations, and verdicts that played out under the glare of national attention. By the time the last gavel fell, the names Mallory, Boone, Cray, and Hensley had become shorthand for a scandal that reshaped Georgia's political and legal landscape. Mallory was convicted on all counts: deprivation of rights, excessive force, and conspiracy, and sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Boone, the police chief who once shook hands with governors and cut ribbons at community events, was handed a 30-year sentence for civil rights violations and obstruction. Cray resigned from the Senate in disgrace before his own trial concluded, but not before prosecutors secured a conviction on conspiracy to defraud the United States and bribery. And Hensley. Hers was the longest trial, the most contested, the one that drew medical experts, ethicists, and grieving families to the witness stand. In the end, she was found guilty on multiple counts of human experimentation and negligent homicide, sentenced to life without parole. But for Nia, the real victory didn't come from the prison terms or the headlines that followed. It came the day the Maternal Justice and Accountability Act passed through the Georgia General Assembly, its vote tally appearing on the State House board in green and red lights. 147 in favor, 21 opposed. The law was simple in language, but sweeping in impact. All instances of law enforcement placing pregnant women in medical custody would be subject to immediate review by an independent oversight board. All transfers would require judicial approval, and any medical procedures conducted under such custody would require explicit, informed consent, documented and witnessed. A section named in honor of Dr. Mariah Kent mandated annual audits of maternal care facilities connected to law enforcement referrals. When the governor signed it into law on a crisp autumn afternoon, Nia stood behind him on the steps of the Capitol, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The cameras flashed, the crowd cheered, but she was thinking of Mariah's last warning, the quiet fear in her voice, and the 74 women whose names had driven every late night, every risk, every confrontation. It wasn't enough to have a law. Laws could be ignored, bent, rewritten in rooms without windows. What mattered was vigilance, the kind that outlived election cycles and news trends. That's why, within months of the Act's passage, Nia and Malik founded the Mariah Kent Center for Maternal Rights. Housed in a converted brick school building on the south side of Atlanta, the center was part legal aid clinic, part research institute, and part advocacy hub. Its mission was clear: protect the rights of pregnant women in custody, track abuses in real time, and train a network of maternal rights monitors across the state. On opening day, families of the victims came from as far as Savannah and Augusta. Some carried framed photos of their daughters and sisters. Others brought stacks of papers, ready to share their stories with the first intake counselors. Nia moved from room to room, greeting people by name when she could, listening more than she spoke. Malik stayed near the logistics table, fielding calls from volunteers and coordinating the media requests pouring in. The center's work began immediately. Within the first 6 months, they intervened in 12 cases where pregnant women were being held in questionable medical custody, each one documented and escalated to the Oversight Board. Their research arm began compiling a database of national custody practices, drawing attention from maternal health advocates across the country. Kayla Mendez, still riding the momentum of her Pulitzer nomination for the Brookhaven Exposé, joined the center's advisory board. She brought with her a steady stream of journalists eager to learn how to investigate systemic abuse without re-traumatizing victims. Jonas Avery set up the center's digital security infrastructure, ensuring that every case file was encrypted and backed up in multiple locations. By the second year, the Mariah Kent Center had become a model for other states. Lawmakers from California to New York requested policy briefings. Congressional staffers visited to study the oversight mechanisms baked into the Maternal Justice and Accountability Act. The center even testified before a Senate committee on maternal health in custody, with Nia delivering a calm but unflinching account of the patterns she'd witnessed in Brookhaven. And yet, for all the progress, the work carried a cost. Nia and Malik knew they were still being watched. Anonymous emails still arrived in their inboxes, some threatening, some merely cryptic. Old contacts of Malik's still whispered about people with long memories who hadn't forgiven the exposure of the ledge. But something fundamental had shifted. Before the raid, before the trials, they'd been moving in the dark, unsure if the truth would ever be enough to pierce the walls around them. Now, the truth wasn't just out. It was institutionalized, codified into law, and carried forward by a community that refused to be silent. One evening, nearly 3 years after the first raid, Nia found herself standing in the center's main hallway, looking at a wall of portraits. They weren't just of the 74 women anymore. The wall had grown to include survivors, women who'd made it out of custody because the center had intervened in time. Each photo had a small brass plaque beneath it, engraved with a name and the date the case was closed. Malik joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "You know, this wasn't supposed to happen," he said quietly. "The system isn't built to let people like us win." Nia smiled faintly. "Then maybe we need to keep breaking it until it is." That night, she wrote a short speech for the center's upcoming annual fundraiser. She didn't plan to talk about the trials or the law, or even about the center's accomplishments. Instead, she wrote about the women themselves, about the lives they'd lived before their names became case files, about Mariah Kent's decision to risk everything for a warning, about the way justice, when it comes, is never a single moment, but a chain of them, forged link by link through persistence and collective will. When she stepped up to the microphone 2 weeks later, she spoke those words to a room filled with people who had, in one way or another, stood in that chain. And when she ended by saying, "We're not here to watch change happen. We're here to make sure it doesn't stop," the standing ovation that followed wasn't for her, but for the work, for the memory, for the promise that what they'd built wouldn't be undone. The Mariah Kent Center's lights stayed on late that night, the glow spilling out onto the quiet street. Inside, caseworkers kept filing reports, advocates kept drafting policy recommendations, and a new intake counselor began taking notes on a fresh case. A woman, 8 months pregnant, picked up on a minor traffic charge in a county 2 hours south. Nia watched from her office doorway, her hand resting gently on the wall of portraits. The fight was far from over, but it was no longer hers alone. And that, she realized, was the real legacy. What happened in Brookhaven is not just the story of one woman, or one corrupt police department, or one corporation willing to trade human life for profit. It is the story of a system that will continue to exploit its blind spots unless ordinary Americans refuse to look away. Nia Caldwell's fight began on a rainy roadside, but it ended up exposing 74 stolen lives, a web of political and corporate collusion, and a truth that should shake every citizen. Abuse of power thrives when no one is watching, and it does not stop at your county line. From Mallory's brutality to Boone's pipeline, from Cray's backroom deals to Hensley's calculated experiments, every step of this scandal was made possible because the machinery of oversight was asleep, and because those benefiting from it knew how to keep it that way. The Maternal Justice and Accountability Act was a victory, but laws are only as strong as the people who defend them. Today it is pregnant women in medical custody. Tomorrow it could be a different group, targeted under a different pretext, hidden behind new bureaucratic language. The lesson for every American is clear. Transparency is not given. It is demanded. Accountability is not a gift from leaders. It is a condition we must enforce. If a single act of courage from a whistleblower like Sasha Linwood can topple a wall of silence, imagine what millions of citizens, informed and unafraid, can do together. You have power, not just at the ballot box, but in your communities, at school board meetings, in city councils, in the way you ask questions and refuse easy answers. You have the ability to support investigative journalism, to protect whistleblowers, to demand public records, and to hold elected officials to the promises they make when the cameras are on. And you have the responsibility to remember that justice is not a moment. It is a constant act of maintenance, like keeping a roof from caving in. If Nia's story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you think about the kind of country you want your children to grow up in, don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the truth others want buried. Like this video to push it into more feeds. Share it with friends, family, and co-workers, because the more eyes we have on injustice, the less room it has to grow. Change doesn't just happen. It's made. One voice, one action, one citizen at a time.